Leon Carter and his crew thought they were untouchable, young, ambitious and unstoppable. But one reckless heist, one stolen shipment, and one miscalculated move would turn them from feared dealers into hunted prey, setting the stage for a brutal execution that would shock Blackpool's underworld forever. Leon Carter grew up in one of Blackpool's forgotten corners, a row of crumbling terrace houses that looked out over a railway line and a stretch of gray sky. His childhood was ordinary in every way except for the chaos around him. His father had been in and out of prison for petty theft, and his mother worked long hours at a care home. Leon learned early that money ruled everything. By the time he was 15, he was skipping school, hanging around arcades, and running small errands for local dealers. It started with carrying packages and collecting cash, but soon he realized how easy it was to make quick money in the drug trade. At first, Leon wasn't ambitious. He wanted enough cash for new trainers, fast food and nights out. But the power of easy money was addictive. He watched how older dealers were treated, the respect, the cars, the girls, and decided he wanted that life for himself. When one of the local dealers was sent to prison, Leon filled the gap. He began selling small amounts of weed and pills to tourists during the summer months. Blackpool's nightlife was his playground, and the crowds made it easy to blend in. The cash came faster than he had ever imagined. By the time he was 21, Leon had become one of the most talked-about names in the town's underground scene. He wasn't the biggest player, but people knew him. He dressed like a star, drove a silver Audi, and carried himself with confidence. Yet behind the image, he was reckless. He trusted the wrong people, made quick decisions, and believed nothing could touch him. The police had raided his flat once, but they found nothing. That near miss only made him bolder. To him, it was proof that he was smarter than everyone else. Blackpool's underworld was small but dangerous. Rival dealers worked under invisible borders, controlled by men from bigger cities like Manchester and Liverpool. Everyone knew their limits. But Leon didn't care about the rule. He was convinced that he could rise higher than anyone from his town had before. He began sourcing drugs directly from contacts in Manchester, cutting out middlemen, and doubling his profits. It was risky, but it made him feel unstoppable. He started to develop a taste for danger, showing off expensive watches, throwing parties at rented apartments, and bragging about deals he should have kept secret. Older criminals warned him to keep a low profile, but Leon wasn't interested in caution. He saw fear in others as weakness. The more he pushed boundaries, the more his ego grew. Still, beneath his confidence, there was a growing sense of restlessness. The money, cars and attention no longer felt enough. He wanted something bigger, a chance to make a name beyond Blackpool. The small-time deals and weekend profits no longer satisfied him. He wanted a score that would set him apart from everyone else. That hunger for more would soon lead him to make a fatal decision, one that would turn him from a bold young dealer into a marked man. Leon's desire for more money and power began turning into obsession. The nightlife scene that once made him rich now felt small, almost boring. Every night looked the same: quick deals behind bars, fake smiles from people who owed him money, and endless whispers about bigger operations in Manchester and Liverpool. He craved something that would prove he was more than just a seaside dealer. That's when he heard a story that would change his life forever. One night, while sitting in a dimly lit pub near the seafront, Leon overheard two men talking about a warehouse just outside town. It wasn't just any storage place. It supposedly held a shipment of cocaine belonging to a Manchester gang known for their ruthlessness. The drugs were said to be worth hundreds of thousands of pounds, kept there temporarily before being moved south. Leon's ears burned at the sound of the amount: £500,000 worth of cocaine sitting unguarded in a warehouse. It sounded too good to be true, yet too tempting to ignore. The rumor came from a familiar face, an old friend named Darren who once drove vans for local dealers. Darren told Leon that he had helped deliver packages to that same warehouse a few weeks earlier. He described how the gang used the place to store drugs overnight, before moving them across the region. There were no guards, just a coded padlock and CCTV cameras that were rarely checked. Leon's instincts should have told him it was dangerous, but all he could think about was the money. He spent the next week gathering information, watching the site from a distance, and timing every movement. The warehouse was in an industrial area near Preston, surrounded by empty lots and disused buildings. Few people ever went there at night. The plan began forming in his head: quick entry, clean exit, and no violence. He would take what he could carry, sell it quietly through his contacts, and vanish before anyone even noticed. To him it wasn't theft, it was business. Leon shared the idea with a few trusted men from his crew. They were hesitant at first. Everyone in Blackpool knew the Manchester gangs were not the kind of people you crossed. Their reputation stretched far beyond the coast. Stories of disappearances, revenge killings, and drug wars that ended with bodies in canals. But Leon dismissed their fears. He believed he was smarter than them all, careful enough to get in and out without leaving a trace. As he refined the plan, Leon convinced himself that this was destiny. His one chance to escape the small-time world and become something greater. He began to imagine what life would be like after the robbery. New cars, bigger houses, respect from people who had once ignored him. The thought of it consumed him, pushing away any trace of fear or doubt. What Leon didn't realize was that the rumor he trusted so blindly had already spread beyond his circle. Someone else knew he was planning something bold, and someone was watching. The job that seemed like the perfect opportunity was, in reality, the first step into a trap that would seal his fate forever. The night of the robbery arrived cold and silent, with rain sweeping across the streets like mist. Leon had spent days preparing, studying every corner of the warehouse and memorizing the layout. He gathered 3 of his most trusted men, Dean, Kyle, and Reese, all young, desperate, and loyal enough to follow him without question. They met in a small garage on the edge of town, dressed in black, faces hidden behind balaclavas. The plan was simple: in, out, and gone within 15 minutes. No talking, no mistakes, no second chances. They drove through the empty roads in a white van with stolen plates, the headlights cutting through the drizzle. Leon's heart pounded, not from fear, but from excitement. He had done plenty of risky deals before, but nothing on this scale. He felt alive, powerful, and certain that after tonight, his name would mean something in the criminal world. He kept replaying the image of those boxes in his mind, bricks of cocaine worth hundreds of thousands just waiting for someone bold enough to take them. When they reached the warehouse, the industrial estate was deserted. A single streetlight flickered nearby, casting weak light over the metal gates. Leon used bolt cutters to snap the chain, and the group slipped inside without a sound. The air smelled of oil and dust. They moved fast, guided by the dim glow of their flashlights. In the far corner of the building, they found what they came for: stacks of boxes marked with fake shipping labels. Leon tore one open and saw the plastic-wrapped packages inside. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from triumph. They began loading the boxes into the van, working in perfect rhythm. Within minutes they had filled nearly every inch of the vehicle. Leon felt unstoppable. Everything had gone exactly as planned. No alarms, no guards, no interruption. As they shut the doors, he couldn't help but grin behind his mask. It felt almost too easy. But just as they were about to leave, something caught Leon's eye: a red blinking light in the corner of the warehouse. A security camera. He froze, staring at it for a long moment. The angle was poor, the light faint, and he told himself it probably wouldn't capture anything clear. Still, a small voice in his head warned him that someone might be watching. He pushed the thought aside and signaled his men to move. The van rolled out of the gates and disappeared into the dark. By sunrise, Leon had already split the stash into separate hiding spots. He kept his share locked inside a storage unit near the Blackpool promenade, right under everyone's noses. The rest was divided among his crew, with strict orders to stay quiet until the heat died down. He burned the gloves, wiped the van clean, and believed he had erased every trace of evidence. As he sat in his flat that morning, watching the sunlight creep through the blinds, Leon felt like a king. He had robbed one of the most feared gangs in the North and gotten away without a scratch. He didn't know it yet, but the red light in that warehouse had seen more than he realized, and his victory was already beginning to unravel. By the next morning, word of the robbery had already reached Manchester. The warehouse manager found the gates open, the chain cut, and the shipment gone. He made one phone call, and within an hour the place was crawling with men who didn't wear uniforms but carried weapons. The gang's leader, a man known only as Kane, arrived later that day. Cold, silent, and feared by everyone around him, Kane surveyed the empty space with a calm that was more terrifying than anger. He didn't shout or threaten, he simply told his men to find whoever was responsible, no matter how long it took. The investigation began with brutal efficiency. The Manchester crew had connections in every part of the Northwest, dealers, drivers, and street informants. They started by interrogating anyone who had access to the warehouse. The first to vanish was a night guard who claimed he'd been off duty. Then a courier was found beaten so badly he could barely speak. Fear spread fast across the network. Everyone knew Kane's way of handling betrayal, slow and public. Within 48 hours, one of the couriers cracked and gave up a name, a man from Blackpool called Darren, who had talked too much about the shipment. Darren was dragged from his flat in the middle of the night. By the next morning, he had told them everything. The van, the timing, and the man behind the plan. Leon Carter. The story spread through the underworld like wildfire. Leon's name, once whispered with respect in Blackpool, was now spoken with dread. The Manchester gang didn't just want their drugs back. They wanted to make an example. Back in Blackpool, Leon had no idea that his name was already circulating in places where it shouldn't be. He was enjoying his winnings, celebrating quietly with his crew and planning how to move the stash in smaller portions to avoid attention. He noticed a few strange faces hanging around town, unfamiliar cars parked outside bars, people asking quiet questions, but he brushed it off. He believed he had covered his tracks, unaware that Kane's men were already tracing his movements. Within a week, everything began to fall apart. Dean, one of Leon's crew, was caught by the gang while trying to sell a few kilos in Preston. He never made it home. 2 days later, Kyle disappeared after leaving a nightclub. Leon tried to call both of them, but their phones went dead. That's when the first warning arrived, a single bullet left on the hood of his car outside his apartment. It was subtle but clear, they were coming for him. Panic began to set in. Leon moved between different hideouts, sleeping in cheap hotels and staying off the streets. His confidence was replaced by paranoia. Every time he heard footsteps or saw a shadow, he expected it to be the end. He tried calling in favors, but no one wanted to help. The same dealers who once respected him now avoided him completely. Kane's men had made it known that anyone helping Leon would pay the same price. The police heard whispers too, but no one would talk. People in Blackpool had learned that silence was safer than justice. The gang's reputation was built on fear, and their reach extended far beyond the city limits. Leon finally realized the scale of his mistake. He hadn't just stolen drugs. He had stolen from a man who ruled his world through violence and fear, and once Kane set his sights on someone, there was never any escape. Blackpool, once a place where Leon felt untouchable, had suddenly become a city filled with shadows. Word of Kane's pursuit had spread quickly, and the fear it generated was palpable. Leon noticed that people who once laughed at his jokes now avoided eye contact, slipping past him in the street without a word. Friends who had celebrated his successes now kept their distance, unwilling to risk the wrath of a gang that had already claimed his associates. The streets he once ruled with confidence suddenly felt foreign, hostile, and suffocating. Leon tried to keep a low profile, moving from one cheap hotel to another, changing his appearance as much as possible. He dyed his hair, grew a short beard, and wore clothing that wouldn't attract attention. But even with these precautions, he could feel eyes on him constantly. Every unfamiliar car parked nearby, every shadow moving past a doorway made his heart race. He began checking mirrors on the street, peeking through windows, and avoiding his usual haunts. His paranoia became all-consuming. Despite his fear, Leon couldn't resist the temptation of the money he had stolen. He had grown used to luxury. The fast cars, the flashy jewelry, and nights filled with excess. One evening he drove into town in his new BMW, the stolen money burning a hole in his pocket. At a nightclub near the promenade, he flaunted the cash, laughing and drinking with a few old friends who had not yet turned against him. That single night of arrogance was enough for Kane's network to pinpoint his location. 2 days later, a grim message arrived for Leon's crew, a warning shot through a car window near one of the docks, and bodies discovered in grisly fashion. One of his associates, Dean, was found inside a burned-out car, the charred remains barely recognizable. Another, Kyle, was floating in the canal, bound and lifeless. The killings were not just acts of revenge, they were public warnings. Everyone in Blackpool's underworld understood the message. The Manchester gang was ruthless, and anyone associated with Leon would meet the same fate. Leon's paranoia deepened. He abandoned his flat and began moving between friends' homes and abandoned warehouses, never staying in one place for more than a night. The constant fear started to wear on him. Sleep became impossible, and he would often sit in a dark corner, counting money and obsessively checking his surroundings. Every sound, every knock on a door could mean death. The very city he had once dominated now seemed like a cage, each alleyway a potential trap. Attempts to reach his former allies proved futile. People he had once trusted refused to answer calls or meet in secret. Leon realized that the network of loyalty he had built over years had evaporated in a matter of days. Fear had replaced friendship. Even casual acquaintances would no longer provide shelter or assistance. He was alone. By now, Leon understood that Kane's gang was watching him, tracking every movement. Every day was a careful calculation: when to leave a building, which streets to take, where to hide the cash. But no matter how careful he was, Leon knew deep down that he had made a fatal mistake. His past decisions, fueled by greed and arrogance, had set in motion a chain of events that he could no longer control. The Blackpool streets that once promised freedom and wealth had become a prison from which there was no escape. By the time Leon received the message that would seal his fate, he was already running on nerves and exhaustion. Days and nights had blurred into one long stretch of fear. He had been moving constantly, changing hotels, and avoiding the streets he once knew. His paranoia had grown into a full-blown obsession, each shadow or unfamiliar noise sending him into a panic. When the message arrived on his phone, it seemed like a lifeline, an opportunity to cash in part of the stash, and perhaps regain some control over his crumbling world. The text came from someone claiming to be a buyer from Liverpool, offering double the street price for the drugs. Leon didn't hesitate. Desperation and greed overpowered any lingering caution. He spent the next few hours organizing a small portion of the stolen stash, securing it in a nondescript bag, and preparing to meet the supposed buyer. He arranged a meeting in an abandoned car park near the M55, far enough from the center of Blackpool that he thought he would remain unnoticed. He drove there in a borrowed car, keeping the windows tinted and the doors locked. Every instinct that had once made him feel untouchable now screamed warnings, but he ignored them. When he arrived, the car park was silent and empty, save for 2 black SUVs parked at the far end. The night was thick with fog, and the dim streetlights barely illuminated the cracked asphalt. Leon's heart raced as he stepped out, clutching the bag of cocaine like a lifeline. The emptiness of the lot seemed almost too perfect, but he told himself it was just caution from the buyer. He approached the SUVs, expecting to see men negotiating, counting cash, and making quick deals. Instead, the silence was absolute. Before he could react, masked figures emerged from the shadows. They moved quickly, precise, and without hesitation. Leon's bodyguards tried to intervene, but they were outnumbered and overpowered within seconds. There was no shouting, no struggle, just swift, mechanical efficiency. Leon was grabbed, his bag taken, and he was forced into one of the SUVs. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle sped off into the night, leaving the empty car park behind. Inside the SUV, Leon realized the truth too late. He was surrounded by men who didn't intend to negotiate or bargain. Fear finally replaced the arrogance that had carried him this far. The car drove in silence, each turn taking him further from safety and any chance of escape. His mind raced, replaying every risky decision he had made, every warning he had ignored. Every step of the robbery, every flaunted night of luxury, every moment he had underestimated Kane's reach now seemed like a countdown to this moment. By the time the vehicle reached its destination, the outcome was inevitable. Leon's attempts to plead or reason were met with silence. The men around him moved with a chilling purpose, leaving no room for mercy. In those final moments, he understood the magnitude of the mistake he had made, stealing from a man who ruled through fear, who had already punished everyone connected to him, and who would not allow loose ends. Leon Carter was never seen alive again. The SUV disappeared into the darkness, carrying him to a fate that had been determined long before he even knew he had crossed Kane. The trap that seemed like a lucrative opportunity had been carefully set, and his greed and overconfidence had walked straight into it. The decision to meet the buyer, blinded by desperation and desire for cash, marked the final step in a chain of events that would end in his complete annihilation. Weeks passed before anyone in Blackpool dared to speak about Leon Carter's fate. The city, once buzzing with whispers of his exploits, had fallen eerily silent. People avoided the streets where he had once roamed freely, and the clubs and bars that had been his playground were subdued, their owners wary of attracting the attention of Kane's gang. The sense of fear was suffocating, leaving a chilling void where confidence and bravado had once thrived. The story of Leon's disappearance became a dark shadow over the town, a cautionary tale whispered only behind closed doors. It wasn't long before a grim discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears. A fisherman on the River Ribble stumbled upon a body tangled in reeds and debris near the riverbank. At first glance, the remains were unrecognizable. The face was battered, the hands tied behind the back, and the body showed signs of severe trauma. The police were called, and after a painstaking investigation, dental records confirmed the identity: Leon Carter. He had been executed. His life ended in the most brutal and final way imaginable. The shock reverberated through Blackpool's underworld, even among seasoned criminals. The execution itself was methodical. Leon had been shot twice in the head, a calculated act meant to ensure he would never return. It wasn't just a killing, it was a statement. Kane's gang had sent a message that reached far beyond Blackpool. No one could steal from them and survive. The violence wasn't about retribution alone, it was about control, power, and instilling terror. Everyone connected to Leon's network, even tangentially, understood that fear now governed their actions. Those who had once been loyal to him retreated into silence, hiding from a force they knew could strike without warning. The police investigation, though thorough, yielded little. Witnesses disappeared, reluctant to talk, and anyone who had been close to Leon avoided questioning. The Manchester gang operated with precision and secrecy, leaving no trace of their presence beyond the body. Detectives were left frustrated, trapped in a wall of silence, while rumors and speculation filled the void. Some claimed the gang had taken the remaining members of Leon's crew back to Manchester. Others believed they had fled the country, disappearing to avoid the same fate. In either case, Leon's death was absolute, final, and unchallenged. In Blackpool, life continued, but it had changed irreversibly. The streets were quieter, and the thrill of risk that had once lured young dealers was replaced by caution and paranoia. The small-time drug scene contracted, with many moving elsewhere or abandoning the trade entirely. Tales of Leon's arrogance, his theft from Kane, and his grisly end circulated as warnings, etched into the collective memory of anyone who thought they could challenge the North's criminal empires. Leon's rise and fall became a grim legend, a stark reminder that ambition without respect for the rules of the underworld could be fatal. He had sought power and wealth, blinded by greed and arrogance, and paid with his life. The story of his execution spread quietly, like a cold wind through Blackpool, leaving a lasting mark on the city's criminal landscape. His name, once synonymous with daring and confidence, became synonymous with caution and fear, a reminder that in the world of organized crime, mistakes are not forgiven, and debts are paid in the currency of blood. After Leon Carter's death, the atmosphere in Blackpool's underworld changed permanently. Dealers who had once hustled boldly on the streets became cautious, measured, and secretive. Where there had been brash confidence and open displays of wealth, there was now silence and suspicion. The city's nightlife slowed down, and local police noticed a decline in overt drug activity. The story of Leon's downfall spread quickly, whispered in corners and pubs, not as gossip but as a warning. Young dealers were reminded in hushed tones that ambition without caution could be fatal. The stash Leon had stolen from the Manchester gang was never recovered. Some said Kane's men had taken it back, destroying or selling it quietly to erase all evidence. Others speculated that parts of it had vanished into the underground, fueling smaller, temporary trades that no one dared claim publicly. Leon's remaining crew had scattered, each member terrified of the gang that had already executed 2 of them and claimed Leon's life. Their disappearance added to the fear, leaving a vacuum in Blackpool's drug network. Dealers learned quickly that alliances could vanish overnight, and the consequences of crossing the wrong people were immediate and final. The impact of Leon's story reached beyond Blackpool. Dealers in neighboring towns and cities began to adjust their operations, taking lessons from his mistakes. Kane's reputation grew, cementing his name as a figure whose influence extended far beyond Manchester. Stories of Leon's arrogance and demise circulated as cautionary tales, showing the dangers of underestimating powerful gangs. In Blackpool, parents warned their children to stay away from the drug trade, citing Leon as an example of what could happen when ambition meets recklessness. For those who had known him personally, Leon became a complicated figure. Some remembered his charisma, the audacity he displayed, and the rapid rise he had achieved in a short time. Others recalled his arrogance, his tendency to flaunt wealth and take risks without thinking about the consequences. In death, he became more than just a person. He became a symbol. He represented both the allure and the danger of the criminal world. Ambition without strategy, trust without caution, and greed without respect could, and often did, end in disaster. Blackpool's drug scene gradually adapted. Dealers became more discreet, using indirect channels, coded messages, and smaller, less conspicuous transactions. The flashy displays of money and luxury that had once drawn attention and envy disappeared. Fear, rather than respect or loyalty, governed the underground. The lessons from Leon's story were clear: no one was untouchable, and mistakes could be fatal. In the end, Leon Carter's life and death became a dark legend of Blackpool. His meteoric rise and violent fall served as a permanent reminder that the criminal world is unforgiving. Greed, arrogance, and overconfidence could never outweigh caution, patience, or respect for the rules set by those more powerful. Young dealers who once aspired to follow in his footsteps now approached the streets with careful calculation. Leon's name, whispered quietly in the shadows, ensured that his story endured, a chilling testament to the price of ambition in a world where one wrong move could cost everything, even life itself.